They thought I was a senile old woman, a relic to be managed. They rolled their eyes at my stories, patted my hand with that condescending pity reserved for the elderly, and shipped me off to a place with beige walls and the smell of disinfectant. They didn't know that the quiet, gentle caregiver who came to my room every morning wasn't just changing my sheets and helping me with my medication, but was documenting every one of their lies, recording every manipulative phone call, and building a case brick by painstaking brick. My darling children trying to have me declared mentally incompetent to get their hands on my inheritance. Instead, they walked straight into a fraud investigation spearheaded by the one person they never saw coming. If you're ready for this journey, be sure to hit the subscribe button and like this post so you don't miss any updates. And let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. It's always nice to see where everyone is. My story doesn't start in the sterile quiet of the Oakwood senior residence. It starts in a rambling 2-story house with a wraparound porch and a garden that was my pride and joy for 42 years. It starts with the smell of my husband, Frank's, aftershave, a scent that lingered in his closet long after he was gone. Frank was the love of my life, a CPA who was as meticulous with our finances as he was with his prized rose bushes. He used to say, "Eleanor, a man who doesn't plan for the future doesn't deserve one." He planned for mine, right down to the last penny. We didn't have a spectacular fortune, not like the tech billionaires you see on the news, but we had built a comfortable life, a paid-off house in a nice suburban neighborhood, a healthy stock portfolio, and a collection of antique maps that Frank had spent a lifetime curating. All told, it was a respectable legacy to leave behind for our 2 children, Mark and Susan. After Frank passed from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, the house felt cavernous. The silence was a physical weight. My children, who lived a few hours away in opposite directions, were suddenly full of concern. They called daily. They visited on weekends, bringing groceries I didn't need and tidying up a house that was already spotless. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in this big place," Mark would say, his brow furrowed with what I then believed was genuine worry. Susan would chime in, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. "We're just afraid something might happen. What if you fall?" At first, their attention felt like a balm on the raw wound of my grief. I was lonely, and their presence filled a void. I cooked their favorite meals, Mark's pot roast and Susan's lemon meringue pie. We'd sit around the dining room table, the one Frank and I had bought at an estate sale and refinished ourselves, and they would tell me about their lives. Mark was a real estate developer, always chasing the next big deal, always a little too slick for his own good. His wife Brenda was just as ambitious, with a manicure that never chipped and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Susan had married her college sweetheart named Gary, who worked in IT and seemed to fade into the background. She was a stay-at-home mom to my 2 grandchildren, but she always seemed stressed, complaining about the cost of private school and the constant need to keep up with the other families in their gated community. The subtle shift began about a year after Frank's death. Their questions started to have an edge. "Mom, where did Dad keep the key to the safe deposit box?" Mark asked one afternoon while supposedly helping me sort through old paperwork. "Just so we know, in case of emergency." Another time, Susan casually remarked, Mom, that painting in the hallway, the one of the ships, it's probably worth a lot of money. You should really have it appraised. We could handle that for you." I wasn't a fool. I had been a high school history teacher for 30 years. I could read a room, and I could certainly read my own children. I knew they were thinking about the inheritance. It was a little crass, a little premature, but I told myself it was just pragmatism. After all, they were Frank's children too. They deserved to benefit from our life's work. Still, a small, cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I'd brush their comments aside gently. "Oh, don't you worry about that now. Everything is taken care of in the will. Your father was very thorough."
The real campaign started with the forgetfulness narrative. It was insidious. I'd misplaced my reading glasses, something I've done my entire life, and Susan would exchange a loaded glance with Mark. "See, Mom, this is what we're talking about." One morning, I couldn't find my car keys. I searched the house for an hour, growing more and more flustered, while Mark sat at my kitchen table, sighing dramatically. Finally, he found them for me, hanging on a hook in his own pocket. "You must have put them there and forgotten, Mom," he said, shaking his head. "This is getting serious." They started to gaslight me, pure and simple. They'd tell me I'd agreed to things I hadn't. Brenda would call and say, "Eleanor, I'm just confirming our dinner on Friday." I'd be confused. "What dinner, dear?" "You don't remember? Mark told me you spoke yesterday and set it all up. He's really worried about your memory." They were creating a reality where I was confused, incompetent, and unreliable. I started to doubt myself. Had I agreed to that dinner? Did I really put the TV remote in the refrigerator as Susan claimed she'd found it? The day it all came to a head, I was in my garden. I was planting my spring bulbs, the rich, dark soil cool against my hands. It was my therapy, the one place where the noise of their concerns faded away. A sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman in a sharp pantsuit got out, followed by Mark and Susan. They walked towards me, their faces a mask of strained solemnity. "Mom, this is Dr. Elpert," Susan said, gesturing to the woman. "She's a geriatric specialist. We asked her to come and just talk with you." I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands onto my gardening apron. My heart was pounding. A specialist? At my home? Unannounced? "You did what?" "We're worried, Mom," Mark said, taking a step forward. "You're not safe here alone. Dr. Alpert is just here to do a simple evaluation." The evaluation was a humiliating series of questions designed to trip me up. Who is the current president? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? Draw a clock and make the time 3:45. I was so angry and unnerved that I stumbled over a few answers. My hand trembled as I drew the clock, making the circle lopsided. Dr. Alpert jotted down notes on a clipboard with a professionally sympathetic frown. It felt like a trap, because it was. 2 weeks later, they sat me down in my own living room. A pile of glossy brochures for assisted living facilities was spread across the coffee table. "Oakwood has the best memory care unit in the state," Susan chirped, as if she were talking about a 5-star resort. "I am not going to a nursing home," I said, divinely low. "There is nothing wrong with my memory." Dr. Alpert disagrees. She's recommending a more structured environment with round-the-clock supervision. He held up a report I'd never seen, a report based on that one ambush interview in my garden. "We've already talked to your family doctor, showed him Dr. Alpert's findings. He agrees. It's for the best." My own doctor, a man I'd seen for 20 years, had betrayed me. It was then that the full, horrifying scope of their plan crashed down on me. This wasn't about my safety. This was a coup. They were building a paper trail to have me declared incompetent, and with me out of the way, they could get power of attorney, control my assets, sell my home, the one Frank and I had poured our souls into. I fought them. Oh, I fought them hard. But they were 2 against 1. And they had been planning this for months. They had their expert, my doctor's coerced signature, and a narrative of a frail, confused old woman. The final straw was when they discovered a burnt pot on the stove. I hadn't cooked that day. I hadn't even been in the kitchen. But there it was, a scorched saucepan filled with burnt chili, filling the house with acrid smoke. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that one of them had put it there. Susan started crying, wailing about how I could have burned the whole house down with myself in it. It was brilliant in a sociopathic way. I was outmaneuvered. Any resistance on my part, my anger, my accusations, was twisted into further proof of my confusion and paranoia. Within a month, I was a resident of Oakwood Senior Residence, my house was being emptied and prepped for sale by Brenda, and my children held power of attorney over my life. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally caged the crazy old woman.
And just when they thought they had me cornered, they forgot who they were dealing with. They forgot I was Frank's wife. They forgot I spent my life teaching teenagers about strategy, about wars won not by brute force, but by intelligence and patience. They put me in a cage, all right, but they made a critical error. They didn't realize they'd handed me the one tool I needed to get free. Stay with me, because what I did next, you won't want to miss. My first few weeks at Oakwood were a blur of beige walls, overcooked vegetables, and the suffocating scent of industrial-grade air freshener. I was put on the second floor, which was euphemistically called the Sunrise Wing, a gentle name for the memory care unit. The other residents were mostly lost in their own worlds, some mumbling to ghosts from their past, others staring silently at the television that was always on but no one ever seemed to be watching. I felt like a prisoner, not a patient. My children had taken my phone. "It'll just confuse you, Mom." Restricted my visitors. "We don't want to overstimulate her." And informed the staff that I was prone to episodes of paranoia and fabrication. They were methodically stripping away my credibility, piece by piece. Mark and Susan would visit once a week, putting on a great show for the staff. They'd bring me cheap flowers, pat my hand, and speak to me in that slow, loud voice people use for small children and the very old. "How are we feeling today, Mom? Are we eating our dinner? Are we being good for the nice nurses?" It was all a performance, a carefully staged act of filial piety. And the staff, overworked and underpaid, bought it completely. To them, I was just another confused resident, and my children were saints for taking such good care of me. My only lifeline, my only connection to the outside world, was a small, locked metal box that I'd insisted on bringing with me. It was an old military-style footlocker that had belonged to my father. My children thought it just contained old photo albums and letters. They were wrong. It contained my husband Frank's entire financial life, documented on neatly organized flash drives and password-protected hard drives. Frank, bless his meticulous heart, was a digital pack rat. He had scanned every document, every receipt, every tax return, every stock transaction we had ever made since 1998. He had backups of backups. He called it our digital dragon's hoard. My children knew about our general net worth, but they had no idea about the intricate details, the trusts, the specific accounts. And I, as Frank's student for 40 years, knew exactly where to find everything. They'd left me with the keys to the kingdom, assuming I was too senile to know what a key was. The second crucial mistake they made was underestimating the staff. Most of the aides were just there to collect a paycheck. They were pleasant enough, but detached. But then there was Sarah. She was different. She was in her 40s, I guessed, with quiet, observant eyes and an air of calm that was profoundly soothing. She never spoke to me in that patronizing, sing-song voice. She spoke to me like a person. She'd come into my room in the morning, and while she helped me with my daily routine, she'd ask, "Eleanor, would you prefer the window open or closed?" "Eleanor, the news is on. Is there a channel you prefer?" Small things, but they were acknowledgments of my personhood, my agency. I started to watch her. She was incredibly thorough. She noticed everything. She noticed if one of the other residents hadn't eaten their breakfast. She noticed when a resident's medication schedule was off by even half an hour. She noticed the slight grimace on my face when my arthritis was acting up. nothing escaped her. And she wrote things down. She carried a small, leather-bound notebook in her uniform pocket, and throughout her shift, she would make quick, discreet notes in it. I decided to take a chance. One afternoon, during one of my children's visits, I put my plan into action. They were in the middle of telling me how Brenda had found a wonderful stager to freshen up my house, and they had a fantastic offer already, well above asking price. "But you can't sell the house," I said calmly.
Mark sighed, the picture of a long-suffering son. "Mom, we've been over this. You signed the papers, giving me power of attorney. I am handling your finances now. It's for the best. You don't need the stress." "It's not about the stress, Mark," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "It's about the Audubon prints, all 24 of them, the complete set that your father and I bought in London in '88. He and Susan exchanged a confused look. They remembered the prints, of course. They'd been professionally framed and hung in the upstairs hallway. "They're not originals, Mom. Dad told us they were just nice copies," Susan said dismissively. "Oh, no, dear," I said, letting a small, wistful smile play on my lips. "Your father told everyone that. He was a very private man when it came to value. He didn't want burglars to know. They're originals, all of them, certified. The insurance appraisal alone is in a folder in his office desk, the right-hand bottom drawer." I watched their faces. It was like watching a switch being flipped. Their feigned concern melted away, replaced by the naked, twitching greed of two jackals who had just stumbled upon a fresh carcass. An original, complete set of Audubon prints was worth a fortune, a life-changing fortune. "Originals?" Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. "Are you sure, Mom?" Susan asked, leaning forward, her eyes wide. "Absolutely sure?" "Of course I'm sure," I said. Then I let my voice trail off and looked away, as if confused. "Or I think I'm sure. It's so hard to remember things clearly these days. Is it Tuesday?" It worked better than I could have imagined. They left in a hurry, barely saying goodbye, their minds already back at my house, tearing through Frank's office. An hour later, Sarah came into my room to bring me a cup of tea. I had managed to position my chair so that I was facing the door when she entered. My small digital voice recorder, a device Frank had used for dictating letters, was tucked into the pocket of my housecoat, my thumb on the record button. As she set the tea down, I began to cry. Not loud, histrionic sobs, but the quiet, hopeless tears of a broken woman. Sarah immediately knelt by my chair. "Eleanor, what's wrong? Are you in pain?" "I'm going to steal from me," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "My own children. They think I've lost my mind, and they're going to take everything my husband and I worked for." And then I told her everything. I told her about the gaslighting, the fake doctor, the burned pot of chili, and I told her about the Audubon prints. "But the prints, they're not real," I confided, my voice dropping even lower. "I lied. Frank bought them at a museum gift shop in 1992. They're worthless. I just wanted to see what they would do. I know they're talking to realtors, to lawyers. I hear them whispering. I know they're trying to sell everything. And I recorded it. I recorded what I told them. I squeezed the little recorder in my pocket. They think I'm crazy, Sarah. Is there any way you can help me?" I was betting everything on her character. I had seen her quiet integrity, her attention to detail. I was right. She didn't dismiss me. She didn't pat my hand and tell me I was confused. She just listened, her brow furrowed in concentration. And when she was finished, she looked at me with those steady, intelligent eyes and said 4 words that changed everything. Tell me what you need. I know this is hard to believe, but it's the God's honest truth. That one little lie about the prince was the bait in my trap. The truth was about to come out, and their reaction to it would be the first piece of hard evidence. It was going to be glorious. Over the next few weeks, Sarah became my co-conspirator. It turned out she'd been a police detective for 22 years in another state. She'd retired early after a messy divorce and moved here to be closer to her daughter. She'd taken the job at Oakwood because she couldn't stand being idle, and, as she put it, she liked solving puzzles. And I, apparently, was the most interesting puzzle to walk through Oakwood's doors in a long time. She was my eyes and ears. With my permission, she placed the small digital recorder I had in the shelf in my room, hidden behind a stack of books, before my children's next visit. She'd turn it on discreetly when they arrived and collect it after they left. The recordings were devastating. Mark and Susan, believing they were alone with their demented mother, dropped the act entirely. They argued bitterly about the Audubon prints, about how to split the money, whether to use Christie's or Sotheby's for the auction. They discussed the sale of my house in cold, brutal terms, talking about buyers and closing costs and how much would be left after the capital gains tax. They openly mocked me right in front of my face, assuming I couldn't understand.
Did you hear what she said about the stock market last week? Mark laughed. She thinks IBM is still a hot tech stock. God, it's a good thing we stepped in when we did. Listening to the playbacks with Sarah at night, huddled over her laptop with headphones, was a gut-wrenching experience. But it was also galvanizing. Each word they spoke was another nail in their own coffin. Sarah transcribed everything. She created a timeline, cross-referencing their visits with their own documented complaints to the nursing staff about my increasing confusion. They're building a legal case for incompetence, Eleanor, she explained one evening, her face grim in the glow of the screen. Every time they tell the head nurse you've had a bad day or that you're making up stories, it goes into your file. That file is what they'll use in probate court to get full conservatorship. But what we're doing here, this changes the narrative. She taught me how to be a better witness, how to ask leading questions, how to feign confusion to draw out more information. I became an actress in the tragic play of my own life. I'd forget the names of their children. I'd ask Mark how his real estate business was doing, and when he'd start talking, I'd interrupt and ask him if he'd fed the cat. We haven't had a cat in 30 years. He'd roll his eyes at Susan, another piece of evidence of my decline, and she'd dutifully report it to the charge nurse later. Little did they know, their frustrated sighs and condescending replies were all being captured, painting a picture not of my incompetence, but of their relentless psychological manipulation. Meanwhile, Sarah was conducting her own quiet investigation. During her off hours, she dug into Mark's business dealings. Turns out, my son, the successful real estate developer, was leveraged to the hilt. He had 2 big projects that were on the verge of collapsing, and he was desperately overextended. He didn't just want my inheritance, he needed it to avoid financial ruin. Susan and Gary, as it turned out, had just been slapped with a massive tax lien from the IRS for failing to report income from a side business Gary was running. Their perfect suburban life was a house of cards, and they were counting on my money to keep it from falling. The greed I'd sensed wasn't just opportunism. It was pure, cold desperation. They weren't trying to protect my future. They were trying to salvage their own. My children thought they were playing checkers with a woman who had lost her mind. They didn't know I was playing chess with a retired detective, and their checkmate was coming sooner than they could ever imagine. They were going to get exactly what they deserved, and I, for one, was going to have a front row seat. Don't go anywhere because the next move is a doozy.
The plan came together on a gray Tuesday in November, about 3 months after I'd been committed. Sarah had compiled a stunning dossier. It included the transcripts of over a dozen recorded conversations, a detailed financial background check on both Mark and Susan that exposed their desperate motives, and sworn affidavits from 2 other aides at Oakwood, to whom I had confided my fears and who had witnessed my children's manipulative behavior firsthand. But we were missing one key piece. We needed a top-notch lawyer who specialized in elder law and financial fraud, and we needed to contact him without tipping off my children. Getting an outside call was nearly impossible. The nurses placed all calls for me at the front desk, and they always helped by dialing the number themselves, invariably calling Mark or Susan for permission. But Sarah, my resourceful detective, found a way. There was a kindly old volunteer, a gentleman named Arthur, who came in twice a week to read to the residents. Arthur was 85, sharp as a tack, and had a soft spot for me because I was the only one who could discuss the Peloponnesian War with him. Sarah vetted him and discovered he was a retired judge. You can't make this stuff up. Oakwood Senior Residence, it turned out, was full of overlooked and underestimated talent. One afternoon, during a particularly thrilling chapter about the Sicilian expedition, I accidentally knocked a glass of water onto the floor. As Sarah bent to clean it, I slipped a folded piece of paper into Arthur's hand. On it was a name and number. The name was Benjamin Carter, SQ. He was a legend, a silver-haired shark known for taking on complex fraud cases and fighting for the rights of the elderly. Sarah had found him through her old police network. Arthur gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, his eyes twinkling, and that was that.
2 days later, during visiting hours, a man I'd never seen before walked into my room. He was impeccably dressed, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He introduced himself to the nurse on duty as my nephew, Robert, who was just passing through town. He even had a bouquet of flowers. My children had given the facility a very short list of approved visitors, themselves, their spouses, and their children. A surprise nephew should have raised red flags, but he was so charming, so confident, that the nurse just smiled and waved him through. This, of course, was Benjamin Carter. He sat across from me, and for the first time in months, I felt a surge of hope that was so powerful it almost made me dizzy. He had already reviewed the initial file that Sarah had managed to get to him through Arthur. He laid it all out. "Eleanor," he said, his voice calm and firm, "what they have done is textbook financial elder abuse. They used undue influence and fraudulent information to gain control of your assets. The doctor's report, the staged incidents, it's a clear pattern of deception. The recordings Sarah has procured are damning. Their documented financial troubles provide a powerful motive. We have a very, very strong case." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, with a thin, sharp smile, "we let them walk a little deeper into the woods before we spring the trap." The trap was my house. Mark, now holding power of attorney, was eager to liquidate my largest asset. He had a cash buyer, another developer friend of his, who was offering a price that seemed fair on paper, but was still significantly below market value. The closing date was set for December 15th. Benjamin Carter's plan was to let the sale go through. Let them sell it? I was horrified. My home? "Yes," he said. "We let them complete the transaction. We let them take the money and deposit it into an account they control. The moment that money transfers, this graduates from a conspiracy to commit fraud to actual, prosecutable bank and wire fraud. It makes the case ironclad. We'll freeze the assets immediately, but we need the crime to be completed. And don't you worry about your house, Eleanor. We will get it back. I promise you that." So for the next few weeks, I had to play the part of the oblivious, declining mother. I listened as Mark and Susan cheerfully told me about the nice young family who was buying the house, how they were so excited to raise their children there.
The lie was so bald-faced it made me sick. I knew from Carter's research that the cash buyer was a shell corporation owned by Mark's partner, and their plan was to tear down my beloved home and build 3 oversized cookie-cutter monstrosities on the lot. The day of the closing, December 15th, was the longest day of my life. I sat in my room, staring out the window at the bleak winter sky, feeling every tick of the clock. Sarah stayed past the end of her shift, sitting with me, offering a quiet, steadying presence. Around 4:30 p.m., Benjamin Carter called Sarah's cell phone. "The Eagle has landed," was all he said. The sale was complete. The money from the sale of my life's home was now sitting in a new account that Mark had opened under the auspices of managing my finances. He and Susan were rich. They had won. They were celebrating, for a few hours anyway. That evening felt like the quietest moment before a hurricane. The news of the sale should have been a devastating blow, the final bitter nail in the coffin of my old life. But sitting there in the dim light of my room at Oakwood, with Sarah across from me, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a cold, calm certainty. The kind of general must feel when their troops are in position and the enemy is walking blindly into the crossfire. We didn't speak much. We just shared a pot of tea that Sarah had brewed at the nurse's station, a fragrant chamomile that was a welcome change from the usual tepid Lipton. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of anticipation. The next day, my children arrived. I have never seen 2 people look so smug in my entire life. They breezed into my room, radiating a nauseating aura of self-satisfaction. Susan was wearing a new silk blouse that I knew for a fact was beyond her budget, and Mark was sporting a ridiculously expensive-looking watch. My house, my life, had paid for these trinkets. "Mom," Susan chirped, planting a kiss on my forehead that felt as cold as ice. "We have wonderful news. The house is sold. Everything went through without a hitch. Now you have absolutely nothing to worry about. We've put the money into a brand new high-yield savings account for you. It'll be much easier for us to manage your expenses this way."
Much easier, Mark echoed, leaning against the doorframe as if he owned the place. "We had a celebratory dinner last night, steak and lobster. We toasted to you, of course, to your health and security." He held up his wrist, admiring his new watch. "Brenda and I are thinking of finally taking that trip to Italy we've always dreamed of. And Susan and Gary are putting a down payment on a lake house. See, we're taking care of everything. You're all set." They handed me a small, garishly wrapped gift bag. Inside was a snow globe with a plastic replica of the Eiffel Tower. "So you can dream of Paris, Mom," Susan said with a saccharine smile. The condescension was staggering. They thought they had paid me off for a lifetime of love and a multi-million-dollar estate with a $10 souvenir. I played my part. I looked at the snow globe with a vacant expression, shook it weakly, and mumbled, "That's nice, dear. Is it time for lunch yet?" Their faces held a mixture of pity and triumph. They stayed for another 10 minutes, talking down to me about the weather and the bland nursing home food, every single word dutifully captured by the recorder that Sarah had activated when she brought in my morning water pitcher. Their hubris was a gift, wrapped in a silk blouse and a fancy watch. When they left, Susan turned at the door and said, "We'll be back next week, Mom. Love you." It was the most profane thing I had ever heard. The moment they were gone, the machine that Benjamin Carter had assembled sprang into motion. The first step was an ex parte motion filed in civil court. Carter explained it to me later. It's a legal maneuver where you go before a judge with only one party present, our side. It's used in emergencies, when there's a risk of the other party hiding or squandering assets if they get tipped off. Carter presented the judge with a mountain of preliminary evidence, Dr. Alpert's questionable evaluation, the affidavits from the Oakwood staff, and a few key transcripts from the recordings that demonstrated my children's clear intent.
Most importantly, he showed the judge the fresh, multi-million-dollar bank deposit from the sale of my house. He argued that there was an immediate and credible risk that my children, now in possession of liquid funds, would begin to spend and hide the money, causing me irreparable harm. The judge, a no-nonsense woman by the name of Maria Santos, agreed. At 10:15 a.m. the next morning, she signed a temporary restraining order, freezing every penny in that new account. The bank was notified immediately. My children's ill-gotten lottery winnings were now locked away in a legal deep freeze. The second step happened concurrently. Carter filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Mark and Susan. It was a spectacular document, dozens of pages long. The charges included fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, financial elder abuse, and a request for the immediate revocation of their power of attorney. It also named Dr. Alpert for her role in the fraudulent competency assessment and Mark's business partner, the buyer of my house, as a co-conspirator in a fraudulent real estate transaction. At 1:30 p.m., a process server, a formidable-looking man built like a refrigerator, walked into Mark's sleek real estate office and handed him the papers in front of his entire staff. A second server delivered an identical packet to Susan as she was picking up her children from their preppy private school. I have to admit, I savored the image. The time for playing defense was over. For months, I had been the victim, the one being acted upon. Now we were on the attack. And my children had no idea what was about to hit them. You'll want to hear this, because the fallout was immediate, and it was glorious. The first inkling I had that the world had tilted on its axis was a frantic phone call to the nurses' station around 2 p.m. Sarah happened to be standing right there, and she later relayed the entire exchange to me. It was Mark. He was screaming, not talking. The head nurse, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, took the call and held the phone a few inches from her ear. "What do you mean? My mother can't have phone calls," he shrieked, his voice cracking with rage. "I'm her son. I have power of attorney." "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson," Mrs. Gable said calmly, reading from the legal notice that had just been faxed to her by Carter's office. "I have a court order here stating that all non-essential communication must be routed through your mother's legal counsel, Mr. Benjamin Carter. His number is right here if you'd like to—"
Legal counsel? What the hell are you talking about? My mother is a demented old woman. She doesn't have a lawyer. Then came the barrage of threats. He threatened to sue the nursing home. He threatened to have Mrs. Gable fired. He called her every name in the book. All of it was duly noted in a formal incident report by Mrs. Gable herself, who was now thoroughly on Team Eleanor. Sarah just stood by, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Apparently, after getting served, Mark's first call was to the bank to move the money. When the teller informed him the account was frozen by court order, he'd exploded. His second call was to Susan, who was having her own meltdown in the parking lot of the school. Their third call was, of course, to try and bully me. But the legal wall Carter had erected was already in place. They couldn't get to me. They couldn't touch the money. They were trapped. For the next 48 hours, according to Carter, they were in a state of pure panic. They finally grasped that this wasn't a mistake. It was a coordinated attack. They hired a lawyer, a flashy guy whose face was plastered on billboards all over the city. His strategy was exactly what we predicted it would be. Double down on the narrative that I was incompetent and that this whole lawsuit was the work of a manipulative interloper who was trying to get their senile mother's money. Their prime suspect, hilariously, was the volunteer, Arthur. They couldn't possibly imagine that the quiet caregiver, Sarah, was the mastermind behind their downfall. They thought she was just part of the furniture. The first legal response from their lawyer was a motion to have the case dismissed. It was full of bluster and indignation. It painted Mark and Susan as loving, dutiful children who had made the heartbreaking decision to place their deteriorating mother in care for her own safety. It described me as a woman suffering from severe delusions and paranoia who had tragically fallen under the influence of predatory individuals. They attached Dr. Alpert's report as their key piece of evidence and requested an immediate court-ordered competency hearing to prove once and for all that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. It was exactly what Benjamin Carter wanted.
"They've walked right into the kill zone," he told me during his next visit, his eyes gleaming. "They think this competency hearing is their silver bullet. They think they can parade their paid-for doctor in front of a judge and have you declared a non-person. They have no idea what we have. They think they're bringing a knife to a gunfight, Eleanor. We're bringing heavy artillery." They thought they could bully their way out of this. Their panic, their threats, their aggressive legal filings, they assumed it was a show of strength. But every angry word, every desperate accusation was just another gift to our case, another example of their character for the judge to see. And the biggest surprise, the thing that would turn their world completely upside down, was yet to come. They were so focused on proving I was crazy that they never once stopped to think about Sarah. They never asked who she was, where she came from, or what she was writing in that little notebook of hers. They were about to find out. Carter's legal team formally responded, agreeing to the competency hearing. A date was set for 2 weeks away. My children were thrilled. They thought this would be the end of it. They would prove me incompetent, the lawsuit would be thrown out, the money would be unfrozen, and their trip to Italy and their new lake house would be back on track. The night before the hearing, Sarah came into my room after her shift was over. She was out of her uniform, dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a sweater. She sat with me, and we looked out the window at the city lights. "Are you nervous, Eleanor?" she asked gently. "I am," I admitted. "I've never been in a courtroom in my life. They're going to be there, my own children, telling a judge that I've lost my mind. Part of me still can't believe it's real." "It's real," she said, her voice firm, "but so are we. So is the truth. You just have to tell your story. I'll be there, Carter will be there. All you have to do is be the smart, strong woman you've always been. The evidence will do the rest." She paused, then gave me a wry smile. "Besides, I've got a little professional surprise up my sleeve for tomorrow. I always did enjoy testifying." My heart, which had been fluttering with anxiety, steadied. They were focused on me, the crazy old woman. They had no idea they were about to be cross-examined by a 22-year veteran detective who had spent the last 3 months documenting their every move. They thought the star witness against them was a frail grandmother. They were wrong. The star witness was the person they hadn't even noticed. The day of the competency hearing, I woke up before the sun. The fluorescent lights in the hallway of Oakwood cast long, sterile shadows. Sarah was not on shift, but she arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, not in her caregiver scrubs, but in a tailored navy pantsuit that spoke of authority and competence. She carried a garment bag. In it was a conservative but elegant dress I hadn't seen in months. One of my favorites, a soft gray wool with a simple pearl necklace.
"You're not going to walk into that courtroom looking like a patient, Eleanor," she said, her voice businesslike but kind. "You're going to walk in looking like the woman whose life they tried to steal." We didn't speak of the case. Instead, she helped me with my hair and makeup, just as my best friend, Martha, used to do before a big night out. The familiar ritual was grounding. By the time Benjamin Carter's associate arrived to drive us to the courthouse, I didn't feel like a frail old woman being summoned to judgment. I felt like Eleanor Henderson, M.A. in history, retired teacher, widow of Frank Henderson, and a woman who was about to take her life back. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, all polished wood and institutional solemnity. My children were already there, sitting with their lawyer. They looked polished and confident. Mark gave me a brief, pitying glance. Susan wouldn't meet my eyes. Brenda, Mark's wife, was in the gallery, her face a mask of pinched disapproval, no doubt there to provide moral support and witness their glorious victory. They saw me, but they didn't really see me. They just saw the dowdy, confused old woman they had created. They certainly didn't notice Sarah, who sat quietly in the back of the courtroom like any other spectator. Their lawyer, a man named Lawrence Mills, who oozed a cloying, insincere charm, opened the proceedings.
He painted a masterful picture of sorrow and necessity. He spoke of Mark and Susan's agonizing decision, their sleepless nights, and their unwavering devotion to their mother's safety. He made it sound like they deserved a medal. Then he called his star witness, Dr. Albert. She strode to the stand with an air of professional gravity. Under Mills's gentle questioning, she recounted her evaluation. She described my agitated state, my inability to focus, my significant cognitive impairment. The lopsided clock I'd drawn under duress was produced as a key piece of evidence, Exhibit A. It was all very convincing. She concluded with a grave pronouncement. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Henderson is a danger to herself. She is incapable of making rational decisions, particularly regarding her health and her finances. She requires a structured, supervised environment and a legal guardian to manage her affairs. Next, Mark took the stand. He was the perfect picture of the dutiful son. He choked up when he described finding the burned pot of chili on the stove. I just thank God I got there in time. The house could have burned down. She could have died. He recounted my obsession with the Audubon prints, presenting it as clear evidence of my detachment from reality. One day she thinks they're priceless originals, the next she can't even remember them. It's been heartbreaking to watch. Susan followed, her testimony a cascade of crocodile tears. She spoke of my paranoia, my wild accusations, and my increasing confusion. "We love our mother," she sobbed, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "Everything we've done, every single decision has been out of love. We just want her to be safe." Their performance was flawless. By the time they were done, the air in the courtroom was thick with sympathy for these two long-suffering children. I glanced at the judge. She was an older woman, with sharp, intelligent eyes that revealed nothing. I felt a flicker of fear. What if she believed them? What if this was all for nothing? But then, Benjamin Carter rose to his feet. He was the epitome of calm. "Mr. Henderson," he began, approaching the stand where Mark still sat puffed up with self-righteousness. "You testified that your mother is completely detached from financial reality, that she is, in essence, a child when it comes to money, correct?" "Absolutely. She has no grasp of it anymore." "I see. So she would have no memory, for example, of establishing a complex series of irrevocable trusts back in 2012 with her husband, Frank?" Mark blinked. "Trusts? I'm not aware of the details."
"Really?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "Because your father, a meticulous CPA, set them up specifically to manage your mother's long-term finances and to minimize estate taxes. An incredibly shrewd and forward-thinking plan. A plan he discussed at length with his wife, who co-signed every document. You see, Mr. Henderson, almost 70% of your parents' assets, including a significant portion of the stock portfolio, are locked in these trusts. They are not part of the liquid estate that you have been so eager to control. You knew about these trusts, didn't you, Mark? You and your sister are the named beneficiaries, after all. But you've conveniently failed to mention them, because you can't touch that money while your mother is alive." Mark's confident expression faltered. He sputtered, That's a separate legal issue. It has nothing to do with her competency." "Oh, I think it has everything to do with it," Carter said smoothly. He then turned his attention to Dr. Alpert, who was recalled to the stand. He questioned her about her one and only meeting with me, the ambush in my garden. He got her to admit that she had performed no follow-up tests, had not reviewed my 20-year medical history with my actual primary care physician,
and that her diagnosis was based almost entirely on a 30-minute interview conducted under highly stressful circumstances. Then came the kill shot. "Dr. Alpert," Carter said, "isn't it true that you've served as a geriatric specialist on 7 other cases in the past 2 years that were referred to you by Henderson Development Corporation?" The color drained from Dr. Alpert's face. Lawrence Mills shot to his feet, objecting, but the judge just waved him down. "She will answer the question." "Well, she stammered, "I suppose that's possible. It's a professional referral." "So the same company owned by the man who stands to gain millions by having his mother declared incompetent just happens to be one of your frequent business associates. I'm sure that's just a coincidence," Carter said, letting the words hang in the air, before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff rests its case on the testimony of financially motivated family members and a doctor with a clear conflict of interest. I, on the other hand, would like to present a witness with a slightly more objective view." He paused, looking toward the back of the courtroom. "The defense calls Sarah Jensen to the stand." My children's heads whipped around. Their faces were a comical mask of confusion. Sarah Jensen, the caregiver? What on earth could she possibly have to say? They watched, completely dumbfounded, as Sarah walked confidently to the front of the courtroom and was sworn in. They still didn't get it. They just thought our lawyer was scraping the bottom of the barrel, calling a nurse's aide to testify about my eating habits. They were about to get the shock of their lives. I know this next part is what you've been waiting for. The truth was about to come out in a way none of us expected, and it would be glorious. Carter began calmly. "Miss Jensen, please state your full name and occupation for the court." "My name is Sarah Jensen. I am currently employed as a certified nursing assistant at Oakwood Senior Residence." Mark and Susan exchanged a smug look. This was their caregiver confirming her humble station. Their lawyer, Mills, relaxed back in his chair. "And before you became a caregiver, Miss Jensen, what was your profession?" Carter asked. "For 22 years, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, projecting to every corner of the room, I was a detective sergeant with the Philadelphia Police Department. I spent my last 12 years on the force in the Economic Crimes Unit." A ripple went through the courtroom. Mark, who had been slouched in his chair, sat bolt upright. Brenda's perfectly lipsticked mouth fell open. Lawrence Mills' smile vanished. The judge leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "Detective Sergeant," Carter repeated, savoring the title. "And in your time in the Economic Crimes Unit, what did your work entail?" "Primarily investigating cases of fraud, embezzlement, and confidence schemes. Quite often, those cases involved what is now referred to as financial elder abuse." Carter let that sink in for a moment. "And in your capacity as a caregiver for Mrs. Henderson, did you have occasion to observe her interactions with her children, Mark and Susan Henderson?" "I did," Sarah said, "on a near daily basis for over 3 months." "And did you make notes of these observations?" "As a matter of professional and personal habit, I document everything. This is a contemporaneous log of my observations, including dates, times, and direct quotes."
Carter had the notebook entered into evidence, and then he had Sarah read from it. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah's calm, professional voice filled the courtroom as she recounted, in excruciating detail, the things she had witnessed. She quoted the condescending, infantilizing way they spoke to me. She described their barely concealed greed after I told them my story about the Audubon prints. She recounted my emotional distress after their visits. She provided the sworn statements from the 2 other aides, corroborating her account. It was methodical. It was precise. It was utterly devastating. But Carter was just warming up. "Your Honor," he said, turning to the judge, "Detective Jensen did more than just take notes. With my client's express permission and for her own protection against the gaslighting and manipulation she was enduring, a digital audio recorder was placed in her room during her children's visits. We have audio evidence we would like to present to the court." Pandemonium.
Mills was on his feet screaming about privacy laws and illegal recordings, but Carter was ready. He presented the judge with the legal precedents for one-party consent in our state and argued that the recordings were made not for nefarious purposes, but to document a pattern of abuse against a vulnerable adult. The judge, her expression now granite, reviewed the brief he handed her and then silenced Mills with a single look. "Mr. Carter, play the tapes." The first recording he played was from the day after they believed I'd told them about the Audubon prints. The disembodied voices of my children filled the quiet courtroom, tinny and shockingly clear. Susan's voice, "Are you sure she's not just making it up? I mean, really? Sotheby's?" Mark's voice, "Who cares if she is? We get the house appraised, we get the prints appraised. Once we get the full conservatorship after this hearing, it doesn't matter what she says. We liquidate everything. Her stocks are down this quarter anyway. We can manage it much more aggressively." He then played a clip from the day after the house sale. Mark's voice, "God, I can't believe it's finally over. Did you see her face when we gave her that snow globe? Not a clue, just smiling away. She's completely gone." Susan's voice laughing, "Poor old thing. It's for the best. That check is going to look beautiful in my bank account. The deposit on the lake house is due next week." The courtroom was dead silent. My children had gone from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. Susan looked like she was going to be sick. Mark was staring at Sarah with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The look of a trapped animal who has finally identified its hunter. They had walked in that morning as the dutiful, loving children. Now, in their own words, they had been unmasked as cold, calculating predators. Their entire case, their entire narrative, had been incinerated in less than an hour. Benjamin Carter let the silence hang for a long moment, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense has one final witness." He looked directly at me. "We call Eleanor Henderson to the stand." Walking to the witness stand felt like floating. The furious, betrayed faces of my children were a distant blur. The only thing in sharp focus was Judge Santos, who watched my slow progress with an unreadable expression. I sat down, smoothed my dress, and looked at Benjamin Carter. He gave me a near imperceptible nod. It was time. Carter approached me not as a lawyer grilling a witness, but as a person having a conversation. His voice was gentle, respectful. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, "for the record, can you please tell the court your full name and your former profession?" "My name is Eleanor Henderson. I was a high school history teacher for 30 years at Northwood High. I taught American history and AP European history." "A teacher for 30 years, Carter mused. "I imagine that requires a certain amount of mental organization." "It does," I said calmly. "You can't manage 5 classes of teenagers and grade 200 essays a week if your mind is disorganized." "Of course not," he agreed. "Mrs. Henderson, I'd like to ask you about the incident with the burned pot of chili that your son described so emotionally." I turned my gaze to Judge Santos. I refused to look at my son. "I remember that day very well," I said, my voice even. I had been in my garden all morning, planting my dahlia tubers. I came inside around noon because my son, Mark, was due to arrive. The house smelled of scorched chili. The pot was on the stove. I had not cooked chili. I had not used the stove. I had not been in the kitchen. My son created that scene to make me appear dangerously forgetful. "And the car keys your son found in his pocket?"
"He took them," I said simply. "He knew I'd be flustered looking for them, and he discovered them as proof of my deteriorating memory. It was part of a pattern of behavior my children engaged in to make me doubt my own mind. They told me I had conversations I never had. They claimed I did things I never did. It is a cruel and effective tactic. It's called gaslighting." I could feel the weight of my children's stares, hot with impotent fury. But I kept my eyes on the judge. "Finally, Mrs. Henderson," Carter said,
Your children testified that you have wild delusions about the value of art, specifically some Audubon prints. They use this as a key example of your detachment from reality. Could you please explain to the court the story you told them? I can, I said, and for the first time I allowed myself a small, wry smile. I told them that a set of museum gift shop replicas were priceless original prints. I admit, it was a lie. But it was a lie with a purpose. It was a test, a piece of bait. I wanted to see if their concern was truly for my well-being or for my portfolio. As the recordings you heard today have proven, their only concern was how quickly they could auction my assets and for how much. They failed the test. I leaned forward slightly. Your Honor, I said, addressing the judge directly, I may be 72 years old. I occasionally misplace my reading glasses, and my knees ache when it's about to rain. But I am not senile. I am not incompetent. I am a woman who was systematically lied to, manipulated, and isolated by her own children for the purpose of financial gain. They did not put me in a home for my safety. They put me in a cage so they could rob it. I finished and leaned back, my heart pounding, but my voice had not wavered once. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Lawrence Mills, the flashy lawyer, looked as if he'd been poleaxed. He had nothing, no questions, no rebuttal. How could he? How do you cross-examine the truth? Judge Santos looked down at the pile of evidence before her, the transcripts, the financial reports, the fraudulent doctor's evaluation, Sarah's notebook. She took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. When she looked up, her gaze was fixed on Mark and Susan, and it was colder than a winter tombstone. I have been on this bench for a very long time, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. I have seen a great deal, but rarely, she paused, letting the word hang in the air, have I witnessed such a calculated, cruel, and transparently greedy attempt by children to strip a parent of her dignity and her assets. She looked at them. You are not caretakers. You are predators. You took your mother's grief and loneliness and weaponized it against her for profit. You did not see a person. You saw a piggy bank. She picked up her gavel. The petition for conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Daniels, your power of attorney over your mother's affairs is hereby revoked, effective immediately. Mr. Carter is directed to prepare the necessary paperwork to transfer that authority back to Mrs. Henderson. She wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, her voice hardening, the evidence presented here today, the recordings, the fraudulent appraisal of competency, the deeply suspicious sale of the primary residence to a known business associate presents a compelling case of conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and financial elder abuse. This is now a matter for the district attorney. I am ordering that the complete transcript of this hearing, along with all evidence submitted, be forwarded to the DA's office for criminal review. Bang. The gavel came down. It sounded like a gunshot. My children seemed to shrink in their chairs. The color had drained from their faces, replaced by the sickly pallor of abject terror. It wasn't just about the money anymore. This wasn't a family squabble they'd lost. They were facing criminal charges. They were facing ruin. They were facing jail time. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal activity. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the threat of a long, ugly criminal trial, Mark and Susan crumbled. The civil suit was settled faster than I could have imagined. The fraudulent sale of my house was voided. The shell corporation that bought it dissolved overnight. Mark's business partner, facing his own fraud charges, turned on him instantly, offering to testify in exchange for a deal. My children gave back everything.
They had to drain their own savings, sell their second cars, and cash in their retirement plans to pay for my legal fees and a substantial settlement for damages. Their fancy lawyer dropped them the moment he realized they could no longer pay his exorbitant rates. The district attorney did press charges. In the end, to avoid prison, Mark and Susan both pleaded guilty to lesser felony counts. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, to be served at a county-run elder care facility, a touch of cosmic irony that even I had to appreciate, and were ordered to pay full restitution, a debt that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Their perfect, curated lives imploded. Brenda left Mark within a month, taking the kids with her. She wasn't interested in being married to a disgraced felon with no money. His real estate empire, built on a foundation of debt and lies, collapsed. Susan and Gary had to sell their big house in the gated community and move into a small apartment. The news of what they'd done spread through their social circles like a virus. They were pariahs. The lake house, the trip to Italy, the silk blouses and fancy watches, all of it vanished, like a mirage. They had been so desperate to get my money, and in the end, their greed cost them everything they already had. And me? I went home. The day I walked back through my own front door was one of the happiest days of my life. Sarah came with me. The first thing we did was open all the windows, airing out the stale energy of the stagers and the ghosts of my children's greed. We ordered pizza, sat on the floor of my empty living room, and drank a bottle of champagne Benjamin Carter had sent over. Sarah and I are friends now, the truest kind. She retired for good this time, though she jokes that she's now my pro bono security consultant. We have dinner together twice a week. We're planning a trip. A real one. A cruise up the coast of Norway to see the Northern Lights. I had my locks changed. I hired a new financial advisor, a sensible woman who explains things clearly and treats me like the intelligent person I am. I spend my mornings in my garden, my hands in the rich soil, and it feels like coming home to myself. I am in control of my money, my home, my life. I am not a victim. I am the woman who won. My children have tried to contact me, sending rambling, self-pitying letters full of excuses and blame. I haven't responded. Forgiveness might come someday, but trust? Trust is a structure that has been burned to the ground, and I have no intention of rebuilding on the ashes. They made their choices. They chose money over their mother, and now they must live with the consequences of that choice, just as I am now free to live with mine. What would you do if you were me?
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!